James Chen felt the familiar knot of tension tighten in his chest the moment he turned onto the sycamore-lined street leading to his grandparents' house in Oakwood Creek. The enclave, usually a portrait of suburban serenity with its uniform lawns and quiet cul-de-sacs, felt subtly off. It wasn't just the oppressive humidity of the late summer evening clinging to everything. It was something else. A discordant note beneath the surface tranquility Mei and Jian Chen had sought after decades of relentless work. They deserved this slice of American peace, earned through quiet perseverance. But as James parked, the usually welcoming fragrance from May's prized night-blooming flowers seemed thin, almost fragile, failing to mask an undercurrent of anxiety he couldn't immediately pinpoint. They met him at the door, May and Jian, their faces etched with the familiar lines of age and affection. Yet their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. There was a flicker, a hesitation, that hadn't been there on his last visit from DCMEI's hands. Usually steady despite their age spots, trembled slightly as she poured the oolong tea. Jian recounted Mr. Henderson's runaway lawnmower incident with a forced chuckle that didn't quite land. They skirted around something, their conversation flowing like a gentle stream trying to navigate unseen boulders, talk of migrating warblers, and the blight affecting the rose bushes, substituting for what truly weighed on them. James recognized the pattern, the careful curation of conversation, the shielding maneuver. It reminded him uncomfortably of certain witness interviews, the hesitant dance around a difficult truth. Something was definitely wrong in their manicured paradise. The Thompsons' cat dug up the petunias again, May offered, her gaze momentarily flicking towards the window, a quicker, more nervous movement than usual. Ah, cats. Jian sighed, shaking his head with performative exasperation. Creatures of habit. But it wasn't just the cat. James pressed gently, sensing the evasion. Everything okay otherwise? Neighborhood treating you well? A shared glance passed between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, May sighed, placing her teacup down with deliberate care. It started subtly. James, as these things often do, it began with impersonal annoyances, easily dismissed at first. A tersely worded, anonymous note about lawn edging. Despite their yard being arguably the most meticulously kept on the block, then a formal-sounding complaint citing a previously unheard-of noise ordinance violation regarding the small, ceramic wind chimes Jian had hung by the porch, their delicate tinkling apparently a unique offense in a neighborhood filled with barking dogs and weekend leaf blowers. The complaints felt targeted, suspiciously specific. Then the source became clear. Carol Thompson. Carol lived 3 houses down, a woman whose default expression seemed permanently set to pinched disapproval. Mid-40s, divorced, with an abundance of time and a fierce, self-appointed mandate to police Oakwood Creek's aesthetics and, increasingly, its social fabric. Though no longer the official HOA president, she wielded influence like a blunt instrument, the de facto guardian against any perceived deviation from her narrow definition of acceptable. Her platinum blonde hair, cut in a severe, geometric bob, framed a face that seemed perpetually braced for insult. Whispers of Karen followed her wake, a shorthand for the entitled vigilance she exuded. Carol possessed an unnerving talent for spotting violations invisible to others, her gaze constantly scanning property lines, mailboxes, even the color of front doors. And for the past few months, that intense scrutiny had zeroed in on the Chens. She visited again yesterday, May said, her voice barely above a whisper, confirming James's unease. About the new walkway lights, James frowned. He'd seen pictures. His grandparents had recently installed small, elegant lanterns along their front path, globes of silk stretched over bamboo frames. hand-painted with traditional motifs of peonies and cranes, symbols of peace, longevity, prosperity. Jian had placed them thoughtfully, a quiet expression of their heritage, a gentle touch of cultural identity in their adopted home. They cast a soft, warm glow in the evenings, tasteful and unobtrusive. "What about them?" James asked, keeping his tone carefully neutral, mirroring the practiced calm he employed in difficult professional situations. She claimed they weren't harmonious with the established neighborhood character Jian supplied, the usual twinkle in his eyes replaced by a weary flatness. Her words said they looked out of place. He hesitated, then added, "She used the word foreign." Foreign. The word hung in the air, cold and ugly. A knot formed in James's stomach. He looked at his grandparents, their kind faces, now shadowed with worry, and felt a familiar surge. The protective instinct that sometimes complicated his detached professional demeanor. "Grandpa, that's absurd. They're garden lights. Decorative." "That's what I tried to explain." Jian sighed, rubbing his temples. "I pointed out the Hendersons' inflatable football player last season. Taller than me. Nobody objected to that. But Carol insisted these need special HOA approval. Cited some obscure bylaw about non-standard exterior illumination fixtures. She even implied." Jian trailed off, looking at May. May picked up the thread, her voice thin. She suggested they might be offensive to some people, said they looked like propaganda. Propaganda. The accusation struck James like a physical blow. These gentle, unassuming lanterns, symbols of peace, twisted into something hostile. He looked at May and Jian, immigrants who had followed the rules, worked tirelessly building a small business, raised their children, paid their taxes, contributed to every community they'd lived in. They were the American dream Carol Thompson probably claimed to champion. Yet she was targeting them, twisting their quiet cultural expression into something sinister, something other. "She's projecting her own issues." "Grandma," James said, forcing a reassuring tone he didn't fully feel. He recognized the strategy, framing personal bias as objective rule following. "There's no legitimate rule against tasteful garden lights like yours. It's your property. Don't let her bully you." But Carol Thompson wasn't easily ignored. She operated with the unwavering conviction of the truly righteous, fueled by a simmering resentment James suspected ran deeper than landscaping preferences. Her campaign against the Chens intensified in the following weeks, moving from passive-aggressive notes to direct confrontation. More citations appeared, referencing increasingly arcane HOA regulations, dredged from the depths of the community handbook. She began lingering near their property line, making pointed comments loud enough for them to overhear. She referred to the lanterns and a small stone food dog statue Jian had placed near the bird bath, a traditional guardian symbol meant to ward off negative energy, as clutter and eyesores. Ironically, Carol herself seemed to be the embodiment of the negative energy the statue was failing to repel. She escalated her efforts, attempting to enlist other neighbors. She printed copies of HOA rules, highlighting sections with aggressive pink marker, and went door to door, seeking allies for her cause. Most residents demurred, offering polite non-committals. They were uncomfortable with Carol's intensity, sensing the thinly veiled prejudice beneath the talk of bylaws. The Hendersons, initially inclined to dismiss Carol as eccentric, became abruptly cautious after a scathing, anonymous negative review appeared online for their small landscaping business, citing fabricated issues of unprofessional conduct and substandard work. Fear, insidious and chilling, began to poison the neighborhood's placid surface. People started avoiding Carol's gaze, altering their walking routes to avoid encountering her. The quiet harmony of Oakwood Creek was fracturing under the pressure of one person's targeted animosity. Back in Washington, D.C., caught in the demanding gears of his job, navigating complex jurisdictional issues and reviewing sensitive case files that often involved deciphering motivations behind acts of targeted hostility, James received increasingly distressed calls from his grandparents. May's voice trembled as she recounted Carol shouting at her from across the street, accusing her of pulling weeds too aggressively near the shared property line. Gian sounded defeated, describing how Carol had stood on the public sidewalk, openly taking photographs of their house, her phone held high like a weapon documenting supposed infractions. "She watches us." James, May had whispered into the phone, her fear palpable even across the miles. "It feels like we're always being watched." James felt a frustrating sense of helplessness, compounded by the physical distance. His job involved analyzing patterns of intimidation and harassment on a national scale. Yet he struggled with how to effectively intervene in this intensely personal, localized conflict without potentially making things worse for May and Jeanne when he wasn't there. He considered contacting the official HOA president, Bob Sterling, a mild-mannered accountant known to be easily steamrolled by Carol. He thought about confronting Carol directly during his next visit, but worried about provoking further retaliation against his grandparents. His professional training urged caution and documentation. He advised May and Gian meticulously, log every incident, save every note, record dates and times, avoid direct engagement. He hoped, perhaps naively, that Carol's obsessive focus would eventually shift to another target, another perceived slight against her rigid world order. It was a dangerous underestimation. Carol Thompson wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance with a rulebook fetish. She was a volatile cocktail of perceived victimhood and righteous indignation, primed for detonation. The spark ignited on a Saturday morning, the sky deceptively bright and clear. James was in a classified briefing, his phone switched off, completely unaware of the storm gathering force in Oakwood Creek. May and Gian were enjoying a quiet breakfast on their small back patio, the gentle sun warming their faces. The air smelled of honeysuckle and freshly mown grass from a few doors down. Their silk lanterns, unlit in the daylight, swayed almost imperceptibly in the soft breeze, peaceful symbols against the backdrop of their carefully tended garden oasis. Carol Thompson, however, saw not serenity, but deliberate provocation. Perhaps it was the cumulative effect of her perceived slights, perhaps a specific interaction earlier that morning, or perhaps simply the culmination of her festering resentment. Whatever the trigger, she marched purposefully onto her front lawn, phone already pressed to her ear, her voice rising in a pitch calculated for maximum effect, a performance of escalating panic designed to carry across the quiet suburban street. "Yes, 911. Emergency. I need police immediately. My neighbors, the Chens. Jian and Mei Chen, 12 Oakwood Lane. They're displaying hostile symbols. Foreign propaganda. It feels deliberately anti-American." Her voice cracked, laced with manufactured terror. "They refuse to take them down. I've asked them politely. Cited the rules. Now they're just flaunting it. It feels threatening, like they're trying to intimidate us. Please, hurry! I don't feel safe here. I really don't." She gestured wildly towards the Chen's house, pointing dramatically at the innocuous silk lanterns, lining the walkway and the small stone guardian statue near the bird bath. She described them to the dispatcher using loaded terms, aggressive imagery, communist-style banners, unpatriotic display, painting a picture so grotesquely distorted from reality it bordered on the absurd. yet delivered with a chilling, absolute conviction. Inside their home, preparing to clear the breakfast dishes, May and Jian heard the commotion. Stepping towards the front window, they saw Carol on her phone, arm outstretched, pointing directly at their house. Confusion quickly morphed into alarm. What was she doing now? Minutes later, their apprehension solidified into fear as two police cruisers arrived, tires screeching slightly on the pavement, lights flashing, bathing the tranquil street in urgent pulses of red and blue. Two officers emerged, their movements brisk, professional, hands instinctively hovering near their sidearms as they scanned the property, their faces set in grim lines. Next door, Bill Henderson paused his sprinkler adjustments, watching the scene unfold with stunned disbelief. Across the street, Mrs. Gable, adjusting her curtains, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Carol Thompson remained on her lawn, arms now crossed tightly, a mask of anxious concern barely concealing a flicker of triumphant vindication. The officers, bypassing the walkway adorned with the supposedly offensive lanterns, approached the Chen's front door directly. Their knocks were loud, authoritative, resonating through the quiet house. Jian, his heart pounding, opened the door. May hovering anxiously just behind him, the taller officer, mid-30s perhaps, with sharp eyes and a clipped, official tone, Officer Miller, according to his name tag, spoke first. Sir, MAAM, we've received an emergency call regarding inflammatory and potentially hostile displays on your property. Jian blinked, bewildered. Inflammatory? Hostile, officer. I don't understand. What display are you referring to? The items. Miller gestured vaguely towards the front garden with his chin. The flags, symbols. The complainant reports feeling threatened. We need you to remove them immediately. Flags, symbols. May stepped forward, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain calm. Officer. Flags. They are lanterns. Traditional lanterns from our culture. Decorative. They mean good luck, peace. MAAM, the report we received, described them as unpatriotic propaganda. The second officer interjected. He was older, Officer Davies, with a weary expression that suggested he'd seen too many neighborhood disputes. Impatience colored his tone. Dispatch relayed a report of potential anti-American sentiment. Someone feels threatened. We need compliance here. Threatened by paper lanterns. Jian's confusion was rapidly shifting into disbelief, then a sickening, dawning horror. He saw Carol still standing on her lawn, watching intently. This is about Carol Thompson, isn't it? She has complained before. She doesn't like them because we are Chinese. Officer Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. Sir, we're not here to debate neighborly disputes or motivations. We're responding to a 911 call indicating a potential public safety concern and a possible disturbance. The items are causing alarm. Standard procedure requires eliminating the source of the complaint. Take down the items, now. His tone was firm, leaving no room for discussion. But they mean no harm, May pleaded, her hands twisting together. They are symbols of peace. How can peace be threatening? Take them down voluntarily, or you will be cited for creating a public disturbance, possibly failure to comply with a lawful order. Officer Davies stated flatly, his hand resting on his utility belt. The implication was clear. Jian stood frozen in the doorway, a lifetime of quiet dignity, of striving to fit in, of absorbing minor slights with stoic endurance, warred with the blatant, staggering injustice of the moment. He looked at the delicate lanterns, symbols of his heritage and hopes for tranquility. now monstrously rebranded as hostile propaganda. He looked at his wife's terrified face, her eyes welling with tears. He looked at the impassive officers treating them like suspects, like threats, based solely on the hysterical, prejudiced lies of a neighbor he knew disliked them for who they were. A quiet resolve, born of profound weariness and a sudden, unexpected surge of defiance, settled within him. "No," John said, his voice quiet but unwavering. The word hung in the charged air. "We have done nothing wrong. These are peaceful decorations on our own property. This is our home." The atmosphere crackled. The officers exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. Miller took a half-step forward, his stance shifting. "Sir, your refusal to cooperate is escalating this situation. I'm asking you one more time to remove the items." "I will not," Gian repeated, holding his ground. His chin lifted slightly. "Okay, then," Miller said, his voice hardening. "Sir, you need to step outside. You're causing a public disturbance and failing to comply. You need to come with us." "What? Why?" May gasped, grabbing Gian's arm protectively. "He did nothing. Failure to comply. Creating a disturbance," Miller recited, reaching for Gian's arm. Instinctively, Gian recoiled from the touch. "Don't touch me." "We did nothing wrong." It wasn't aggressive. More a flinch of shock and indignation. That was all it took. The officers, perhaps primed by Carol's frantic 911 description painting the elderly couple as potentially hostile or defiant, perhaps reacting to the perceived resistance of Gian pulling back, moved swiftly. Years of training focused on control and de-escalation through compliance seemed to short-circuit. Miller grasped Gian's arms, leveraging his younger strength to twist them behind Gian's back with surprising force. Davies moved simultaneously, blocking May as she cried out, instinctively trying to reach her husband. "Gian, no, please, stop. He didn't do anything." May's pleas dissolved into desperate sobs, lost in the sudden, shocking efficiency of the arrest. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the quiet street as they secured Gian's thin wrists behind his back. He winced, a sharp intake of breath revealing pain, his face paling with shock, humiliation, and disbelief. May was gently but firmly maneuvered back towards the open doorway by Officer Davies as Miller led Gian, stumbling slightly, towards one of the cruisers. "What are you doing? Let him go. He's 72 years old. He has a heart condition." "Please!" May screamed, tears streaming down her face, her voice raw with anguish and terror. "Ma'am, stay back." "You need to calm down," Davies warned, his tone attempting reassurance but landing as dismissive. They placed Gian in the back of the police car. He sat rigidly upright, staring straight ahead, stripped of his dignity under the horrified gaze of Mr. Henderson. The peering eyes from Miss S. Gable's window and, most damningly, the smug, triumphant stare of Carol Thompson, who was now conspicuously filming the entire scene with her smartphone, documenting her victory. As the cruiser door slammed shut with a heavy thud, sealing Gian inside, May crumpled onto her doorstep, her body racked with uncontrollable sobs. The delicate fragrance of the garden seemed to vanish, replaced by the acrid, metallic tang of fear and profound injustice. The quiet suburban street had become a stage for a deeply personal trauma, broadcast live for the neighborhood to witness. The call reached James just as his intense D.C. briefing on cross-state hate crime coordination concluded. His phone vibrated urgently on the polished table. It wasn't May or Gian. The caller ID showed Bill Henderson's number. A cold premonition washed over James as he stepped out and answered. "James, it's Bill Henderson. Listen, something terrible just happened." Your grandparents, the police. They arrested Jian. They just took him away. The blood drained from James's face. The briefing room walls seemed to recede. What? Arrested? Bill. Why? What happened? Bill Henderson's voice was tight with outrage and disbelief as he quickly recounted the morning's events, Carol's amplified voice carrying across the lawns, her wild accusations to 911, the swift arrival of the police, the argument over the lanterns, Jian's quiet refusal, the sudden, forceful arrest. It was awful. James. Happened so fast. May is completely distraught. They wouldn't listen to reason, said they were just responding to a threat complaint. And Carol, she just stood there, filming the whole thing with this look on her face. Smug. She said something afterward, loud enough for me to hear. Something about finally getting rid of the neighborhood eyesores, rage.cold.sharp, and utterly focused. Sliced through James's initial shock. He gripped his phone, his knuckles turning white. Propaganda, unpatriotic, threatening, arrested, his gentle, kind, law-abiding grandparents. Humiliated and traumatized over decorative lanterns because of a neighbor's poisonous bigotry and a system that could be so easily manipulated. He pictured May sobbing on the doorstep, Jian sitting handcuffed in the back of a police car. The professional detachment he cultivated daily vanished, replaced by the primal fury of a grandson protecting his family. Bill, thank you for calling. Please, stay with May. Don't let her be alone right now. I'm on my way. Immediately. He disconnected the call, his mind already operating on multiple tracks. He wasn't just James Chen, loving grandson, anymore. He was James Chen, director of the Hate Crimes Division at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His entire career was dedicated to fighting exactly this insidious brand of prejudice, the kind that targeted people for their ethnicity, their culture, the symbols that brought them comfort. He dealt with complex investigations, national strategies, tracking organized hate groups across the country. He never, in his darkest professional nightmares, imagined the fight landing so literally, so brutally, on his own family's doorstep, instigated not by a shadowy extremist group, but by a petty tyrant wielding an HOA handbook in a quiet suburban neighborhood. She weaponized bias, he thought, the phrase echoing analyzes from countless case files. She used the system itself as a tool of harassment. He made 2 immediate calls, his voice dangerously calm, devoid of the turmoil churning inside him. The first was to his deputy director, Sarah Jenkins. He explained the situation briefly, citing a critical family emergency requiring his immediate, indefinite leave. He delegated his urgent responsibilities, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sarah, knowing James's usual unflappable demeanor, understood the gravity immediately. Go, James. We've got this. Keep us updated if you need anything. Anything at all. The second call was to the chief of police in the jurisdiction covering Oakwood Creek. He didn't raise his voice, didn't issue threats. He simply identified himself, stated his full title and agency, and informed the chief that he was currently en route to personally address the situation involving the apparently wrongful arrest of his grandfather, Jian Chen, an arrest precipitated by what initial reports strongly suggested was a racially motivated false 911 call made by a neighbor, Carol Thompson. He mentioned his grandparents' names again, slowly and clearly, May and Jian Chen. There was a distinct pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sputtering sound. James could almost hear the color draining from the chief's face. The sudden, dawning realization of who, exactly, had just been arrested based on a Karen call. Director Chen. I assure you, we will look into this immediately. the chief stammered. There must be some misunderstanding. I expect a full briefing upon my arrival. Chief Davis, James stated coolly, including the identities of the arresting officers, the full content of the 911 call, and any prior complaint history involving Miss Thompson and my grandparents. I will be at your station within hours. He disconnected before the chief could respond further. The flight felt interminable. James stared unseeing at the clouds below, his mind a maelstrom of protective fury and cold, analytical assessment. He pictured May's tear-streaked face, Jeanne's quiet humiliation, the red marks likely already forming on his elderly wrists. He thought of Carol Thompson, her smug satisfaction captured on film, her casual cruelty draped in the faux legitimacy of neighborhood rules. She had twisted symbols of peace into threats, traumatized two senior citizens whose only offense was their heritage, and manipulated law enforcement into doing her dirty work. She has no idea, James thought, a grim certainty hardening within him. She has absolutely no idea who she just provoked. This wasn't just about lanterns anymore. This was about hate, abuse of process, and the full weight of federal attention crashing down on Oakwood Creek. Landing. James bypassed the usual rental car counters, flashing his credentials to arrange immediate, secure transport. His focus was absolute. He drove straight to the Oakwood Creek Police Department, a modest brick building that looked inadequate for the storm about to break over it. Chief Davis, a portly man whose anxious eyes darted nervously, met him at the entrance, practically wringing his hands. Several other uniformed officers hovered awkwardly in the background. Director Chen, welcome. This is a terrible misunderstanding, Davis began, already sweating despite the air conditioning. A regrettable incident. Our officers were responding to an agitated caller reporting hostile symbols, potential threat, heightened situation protocols. You understand. Officer training emphasizes de-escalation, but also response to perceived threats. James cut through the preemptive excuses, his voice low, steady, and carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. Chief Davis, where are my grandparents? Davis flinched slightly. Mr. Chen was processed, standard procedure for the initial charges, and released on his own recognizance about an hour ago. A neighbor, Mr. Henderson, picked him up. The charges, disturbance of the peace, failure to comply. They are technically pending, but he trailed off, looking miserable. Mrs. Chen was never formally arrested, just detained at the scene briefly while officers secured Mr. Chen. Pending charges based on what tangible evidence witnessed by your officers before they initiated contact. James drilled down, his gaze sharp, or based solely on the unsubstantiated, hysterical claims of a third-party caller. Did your officers actually witness Jian Chen disturbing the peace, or did their intervention create the disturbance? Well, the complainant, Miss Thompson, she was quite insistent. Davis began, fumbling. The complainant, James interrupted again, his voice dropping further, each word precise, appears to have filed a malicious false report, leveraging racial bias to incite a police response. Actions which likely constitute serious violations under both state and federal statutes, including potentially Title 18, Section 241, and 242. Where are the arresting officers? Chief, I need their incident reports, their body cam footage, the complete, unedited recording of Carol Thompson's 911 call, and all records pertaining to any previous complaints filed by or against Miss Thompson involving my grandparents or other residents. I need them now. Chief Davis swallowed hard, his face pale. The mention of specific federal statutes clearly registered. Yes, Director. Right away, Director. We're compiling everything for you. James found May and Gian back at their house, sitting in stunned silence in their familiar living room. Bill Henderson was there, quietly making tea, his solid presence a small anchor in the aftermath. The moment May saw James, she rushed to him, burying her face in his chest, her small body shaking with residual fear and grief. Eve. Gian remained seated on the sofa, hunched slightly, staring down at his hands. Faint red marks were still visible on his thin wrists. The look in his eyes, a mixture of shame, bewilderment, and profound violation, cut James deeper than any bureaucratic obstacle or professional challenge ever could. Grandpa, Grandma, James said softly, kneeling in front of them, taking their hands. I am so sorry this happened to you. This is not your fault. You did absolutely nothing wrong. They put handcuffs on me. James, Gian whispered, his voice hoarse, cracking with emotion. In front of everyone, Bill saw Miss S. Gable Carroll filming. Like I was a common criminal. We were so frightened. May sobbed, clinging to James. The police, they wouldn't listen. They just took him. James held them close, letting his own carefully constructed composure fracture just enough to absorb some of their pain. He then explained, more fully than he ever had before, what his job truly entailed. They knew he worked for the government, something important in Washington. But the specifics, Director, FBI Hate Crimes Division, had remained vague, partly due to the nature of his work, partly due to their own humble discretion. Hearing it now, in this context, brought a new understanding, a glimmer of hope amidst the trauma. Carol Thompson picked the wrong family to harass, James said, a steely edge hardening his voice as he met their tear-filled eyes. Her campaign of intimidation ends today, and believe me, she will be held accountable for what she did. He spent the next hour meticulously documenting their accounts, his professional training kicking in despite the personal stakes. He noted every detail, the timeline of Carol's harassment, the specific words used, the fear May felt being watched, the physical discomfort and deep emotional shame Gian experienced during the arrest. He gently examined the slight bruise forming on Gian's arm where Officer Miller had grabbed him forcefully. He documented the lingering fear that shadowed their expressions, the way May still flinched at sudden noises. Then, he stepped outside, surveying the scene with a practiced eye. The silk lanterns still hung along the walkway, incongruously serene, their painted peonies and cranes appearing almost defiant in the afternoon sun. Carol Thompson's house 3 doors down stood silent, curtains drawn tight. But James felt her presence, her presumed smug certainty radiating across the carefully manicured lawns. She thought she had won. She had no idea the war had just begun. His phone buzzed. Chief Davis. The requested materials were ready for pickup. James drove back to the station, his expression grim. He collected the files, incident reports, the audio recording of the 911 call, and the body cam footage from both officers, back in the quiet sanctuary of his grandparents' living room. While May rested and Gian sat with Bill Henderson quietly talking on the patio, James sat down at the dining table and began his review. The 911 call was even more chilling than Henderson's description. Carol's voice, pitched high with feigned terror, dripped with malice as she deliberately misrepresented the lanterns. She used loaded terms like communist symbols, anti-American display, and aggressive foreign elements. Crucially, she explicitly mentioned their race multiple times. The Chinese people down the street. You know what they can be like. directly linking their ethnicity to the fabricated threat. It was a textbook example of weaponized prejudice, designed to provoke maximum alarm and bypass rational assessment. The body cam footage was equally damning, perhaps more so. It showed officers Miller and Davies arriving, already operating under the assumption of a potentially volatile situation based entirely on Carol's manipulative report. It captured Jian's polite confusion being met with immediate suspicion and demands for compliance. It showed May's desperate, reasonable attempts to explain the cultural significance and peaceful nature of the lanterns being systematically brushed aside. The footage starkly revealed the unnecessary escalation, the officer's rigid adherence to the initial flawed premise. The physical force employed against a frail, non-resisting elderly man. The dismissal of May's frantic pleas about Jian's health condition. And then, the crucial moment James had suspected might exist. As the officers walked back towards their cruisers after placing Jian inside, away from the immediate vicinity of May or other witnesses, Officer Davies muttered to Miller, clearly captured by Miller's body cam audio, another one of Thompson's crackpot calls. Probably. Always something with her. But hey, better safe than sorry. Right. Gotta clear the complaint. They knew. James realized, a cold fury settling deep in his bones. They knew Carol Thompson had a history of making frivolous or exaggerated complaints. They suspected this call might be baseless. Yet they proceeded with an aggressive enforcement action based solely on her word, culminating in the forceful arrest of an elderly man, rather than undertaking even a cursory, objective assessment of the situation themselves. Their actions weren't just poor procedure. They suggested a reckless disregard for the citizens they were sworn to protect, potentially influenced by the racial bias embedded in the initial call and visible in the background periphery of the footage. Just as Henderson described, Carol Thompson, phone held high, a distinct, predatory smile playing on her lips as Jian was led away in handcuffs. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA enforcer having a bad day. This was targeted harassment, escalating into a dangerous false report that leveraged racial bias to incite police action, resulting in assault and unlawful arrest. This was federal jurisdiction. James spent the remainder of the day and evening coordinating, working with the quiet intensity his team knew well. He contacted the local Point Use Attorney's office, outlining the facts succinctly and providing the initial evidence. He briefed his own team at the FBI, initiating a preliminary inquiry into potential federal civil rights violations by Carol Thompson, specifically 18 U.S.C. 241, conspiracy against rights, and potentially 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, depending on how her actions were interpreted legally in relation to inciting state actors, and tasking analysts to assess the Oakwood Creek Police Department's response for patterns of bias, inadequate training, or procedural failures related to handling potentially biased complaints. He arranged for highly respected local counsel for his grandparents, ensuring the immediate dismissal of the bogus local charges and preparing for potential civil action against both Carol Thompson and potentially the city police department. News of the arrest and Jian's subsequent release traveled through Oakwood Creek like wildfire. Whispers in the morning turned into shocked murmurs by afternoon, then concerned phone calls and hushed driveway conversations by evening. Neighbors who had previously maintained a careful distance, intimidated by Carol, or simply unwilling to get involved, started appearing tentatively at the Chen's doorstep. Mrs. Gable brought over a casserole, her eyes filled with apology. Young Mr. Davies from across the street offered to mow their lawn. Several others arrived with flowers, baked goods, and quiet words of support, many expressing shame for not speaking up sooner against Carol's escalating behavior. Bill Henderson, no longer silenced by fear of online retaliation, recounted the details of the arrest to anyone who would listen, his voice shaking with righteous indignation. Mrs. Sau, Gable corroborated seeing Carol filming Gian's arrest, confirming her triumphant expression. The tide of neighborhood opinion, once cowed into silence by Carol's aggressive posturing, began turning sharply, decisively against her. Carol Thompson, however, remained oblivious, presumably ensconced within her fortress of self-righteousness. She likely spent the afternoon basking in the perceived success of her actions, believing she had finally enforced her version of order, put the Chens in their place, and ensured the removal of the offensive decorations. She had no concept of the federal storm gathering directly above her, orchestrated by the grandson of the very people she had targeted. The following morning, James accompanied May and Gian back to the police station, not to answer charges, but to provide formal, detailed statements as victims. Chief Davis was visibly sweating, his apologies now profuse and bordering on desperate. The bogus charges against Gian, disturbance of the peace, failure to comply, were immediately and unconditionally dropped, wiped from the record as if they had never existed. James accepted the chief's stammered apologies with a curt nod, making it implicitly clear that this gesture, while necessary, was merely the first step and far from concluded the matter. As they exited the station, stepping into the bright morning sunlight, a local news van, alerted perhaps by a concerned neighbor or even someone within the increasingly nervous police department seeking to control the narrative, pulled up abruptly. A reporter hurried towards them. Microphone extended. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen, can you comment on the incident yesterday? We received reports of an arrest involving a dispute over lawn decorations, with allegations of possible racial bias contributing to the situation. Before May or Gian could react, James stepped forward smoothly, positioning himself protectively beside his grandparents. He faced the camera directly, his expression calm but resolute. My grandparents, May and Gian Chen, are respected members of this community, he began, his voice clear and carrying an unexpected authority that made the reporter pause. Yesterday, they were the victims of a malicious and apparently racially motivated false report to law enforcement. This fabricated complaint resulted in a traumatic and wholly unjustified arrest of my grandfather. He paused deliberately, letting the weight of his words sink in, his gaze steady on the camera lens. This incident is now the subject of investigations by local authorities and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Hate Crimes Division. He saw the flicker of surprise, then intense interest, in the reporter's eyes. My name is James Chen, he continued, his voice level but resonant. I am the director of that division at the FBI, and I can assure you, and the public, that we take acts of targeted intimidation, the filing of false reports intended to harass based on race or national origin, and the potential weaponization of law enforcement through bias extremely seriously. There will be accountability. The reporter's jaw tightened, eyes widening almost imperceptibly. The camera zoomed slightly, capturing James's determined expression. He gently guided his grandparents past the sudden flurry of follow-up questions towards their waiting car, leaving the reporter scrambling to process the bombshell revelation. The story had just exploded from a local neighborhood dispute into a federal matter involving prejudice, abuse of process, and the director of the FBI's Hate Crimes Unit, whose own elderly immigrant grandparents had become targets. The shockwave hit Oakwood Creek almost instantly. Phones began buzzing across the neighborhood as residents shared the news clip link. Driveway conversations turned urgent, voices hushed with disbelief and a dawning sense of gravity. Carol Thompson's name was suddenly on everyone's lips, no longer just associated with petty HOA complaints, but now inextricably linked with racial prejudice and a federal investigation led by the victim's own grandson. The Karen who meticulously measured lawn height and policed recycling bin placement was now facing the full scrutiny of the FBI. Carol herself must have seen the news report shortly after it aired. Perhaps a neighbor, motivated by schadenfreude or genuine alarm, sent her the link, or perhaps she stumbled upon it while searching for validation of her actions online. Her initial reaction was likely stunned disbelief, quickly followed by indignant fury. This couldn't be happening. It was about rules. It was about neighborhood character. How dare they twist this? Fueled by outrage, she probably stormed out of her house, ready to confront the news van still lingering down the street, ready to deliver her righteous justification. The narrative of the vigilant citizen bravely protecting community values from foreign encroachment and disrespectful outsiders. She didn't get the chance. As she reached the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, her face flushed with anger, two unremarkable sedans pulled up quietly, boxing her driveway slightly. Plainclothes individuals emerged, not local police this time, their demeanor calm, professional, efficient. FBI agents. One held up credentials briefly, while the other held a folded document, a warrant for her arrest. Carol Thompson, the lead agent asked, his voice polite but firm, cutting through her impending tirade. Carol stared, momentarily speechless, her planned outburst dying in her throat. Yes. What? What is this? You are under arrest, Miss Thompson. The agent stated clearly, for potential violations of Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 241, Conspiracy Against Rights, and related federal statutes pertaining to the filing of a false police report intended to intimidate and harass individuals based on their race and national origin, resulting in a deprivation of rights. The legalese washed over her, dense and terrifying. But the core message was brutally clear. Arrest FBI race conspiracy. Her face crumpled, not with remorse, but with sheer, uncomprehending outrage. What? This is ludicrous. It was about the lanterns. HOA rules. They were inappropriate. Unpatriotic. It had nothing to do with race. This is harassment, MAAM. You have the right to remain silent. The second agent began reciting the familiar Miranda warning, calmly, as they gently but firmly guided her hands behind her back. The click of handcuffs fastening sounded unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent street. Neighbors watched from behind windows and on porches, stunned into silence. Bill Henderson stood beside James and the Chens on their lawn, witnessing the quiet, inexorable turning of the wheels of justice. There was no shouting this time, no performative panic from Carol, just the stark reality of her actions catching up to her. Her face pale, slack-jawed with shock. Carol Thompson, the self-appointed guardian of Oakwood Creek's purity, was led to one of the waiting federal vehicles. The smug architect of the Chen's public humiliation was now facing the severe, life-altering consequences of her hate-fueled vendetta. The irony was stark, almost poetic. The woman obsessed with enforcing neighborhood rules was being arrested for breaking federal laws designed to protect fundamental civil rights. The story exploded onto the national stage. News outlets seized on the compelling narrative, HOA Karen arrested by FBI after targeting elderly Asian American couple, grandson revealed as FBI hate crimes director. The headlines screened across websites and cable news chyrons. The case tapped into a confluence of raw nerves in the American psyche. widespread frustration with overzealous HOAs, rising concerns about anti-Asian hate and discrimination, awareness of elder abuse, and the potent, almost unbelievable symbolism of a high-ranking federal law enforcement official whose own family wasn't immune to the very prejudice he fought daily. James shielded his grandparents from the ensuing media frenzy as much as possible, staying with them at their house, fielding calls, acting as a buffer. He liaised closely with the U.S. Attorney's Office and his own agency, maintaining careful professional distance from the direct investigation itself, and managed the legal team representing May and Gian. The Oakwood Creek Police Department, facing intense public scrutiny and internal pressure, launched a formal internal affairs investigation into the conduct of Officers Miller and Davies, as well as Chief Davis's departmental policies and oversight regarding bias complaints. Miller and Davies were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. The federal investigation into Carol Thompson quickly painted an even darker, more comprehensive picture than initially suspected. Agents uncovered a documented history of similar complaints filed against other minority families in previous neighborhoods where she had resided. Digital forensic analysis revealed anonymous online forum posts under usernames linked to her IP address, containing racial slurs and xenophobic rhetoric. Her social media history, while curated on the surface, showed patterns of liking and sharing content from nationalist and anti-immigrant groups. The 911 call targeting the Chens wasn't an isolated lapse in judgment spurred by a neighborhood dispute. It was the calculated culmination of a long-held, deeply ingrained prejudice, finally acted upon with malicious intent and dangerous consequences. The legal process moved forward with deliberate speed. Carol, initially unable or unwilling to grasp the gravity of her situation, adopted a belligerent stance. She fired her court-appointed attorney, claiming conspiracy and insisting on representing herself, ranting incoherently to the presiding magistrate about property values, patriotism, and being unfairly targeted for upholding standards. However, faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence presented by the assistant U.S. attorney, the chilling 911 recording, the damning body cam footage capturing not only the arrest, but the officer's cynical commentary, multiple sworn statements from neighbors detailing her pattern of harassment, and her own extensive digital footprint of prejudice, the fragile edifice of her self-righteousness began to crumble. Reality, cold and harsh, set in. Her bluster evaporated, replaced by a sullen, fearful silence. She eventually accepted a new public defender, who starkly advised her that the case against her was overwhelming and a conviction at trial was virtually certain, likely resulting in a lengthy prison sentence. The Point Use Attorney's Office pursued the charges vigorously, recognizing the case's significance beyond the individual players. This wasn't just about penalizing Carol Thompson. It was about sending an unequivocal message. Weaponizing emergency services and law enforcement as tools of racial harassment and intimidation is a serious federal crime with severe consequences. Exploiting stereotypes to endanger vulnerable individuals would not be tolerated. James found himself navigating the complex intersection of the personal and the professional. He formally recused himself from any direct oversight role in the prosecution of Carol Thompson to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. However, he remained the primary point of contact and support for his grandparents and served as a key cooperating witness for the prosecution. He delivered his testimony calmly and factually during depositions, detailing the history of Carol's escalating harassment, the specific incidents, and the profound emotional and psychological impact of the false report and subsequent arrest on May and Gian. his grandparents, those still bearing the invisible scars of the ordeal, demonstrated remarkable resilience throughout the process. Bolstered by the outpouring of genuine support from their community, many neighbors now openly acknowledging Carol's long-standing problematic behavior and the swift, decisive action of the federal authorities spurred. James knew with a complex mix of gratitude and discomfort, largely by his own position and intervention. They agreed to cooperate fully with the prosecution. They provided poignant victim impact statements. Their words translated where needed, describing their fear, humiliation, and the deep sense of violation they felt. May spoke of sleepless nights, of the lingering anxiety that made her jumpy in her own home, of feeling unwelcome in the neighborhood they had chosen for its peace. Gian described the indelible shame of being handcuffed on his own doorstep, like a dangerous criminal. The feeling that his decades of striving to be a good citizen, a contributing member of society, had meant nothing in the face of blind prejudice fueled by garden lanterns. Meanwhile, the Oakwood Creek Homeowners Association Board convened an emergency session. Bob Sterling, the formerly timid president, finding courage in the community's collective outrage and the unwelcome glare of the national spotlight, led the charge. Carol Thompson was summarily stripped of all committee positions, a formality, given her arrest and formally censured by the board in a strongly worded resolution. The HOA issued a public apology to the Chen family, acknowledging the misuse of community rules for harassment and pledging a comprehensive review and revision of bylaws to implement safeguards against discriminatory weaponization. They went a step further, organizing a neighborhood potluck picnic explicitly in honor of May and Gian, held on the community green space. It was a powerful gesture of solidarity and reconciliation that brought tears to May's eyes and marked a tangible shift in the neighborhood's climate. Faced with the undeniable weight of evidence, the prospect of a potentially devastating trial outcome, and strong advice from her counsel, Carol Thompson ultimately chose to accept a plea bargain offered by the Point Use Attorney's Office. She agreed to plead guilty to one felony count of making a false report, resulting in an emergency response and intimidation based on race under relevant federal statutes. The more complex conspiracy and deprivation of rights charges were held in abeyance, contingent upon her full cooperation with the ongoing internal investigation into the police department's response and her acceptance of the sentencing terms. The sentencing hearing was held several months later in federal court. The courtroom was packed. Media representatives filled the back rows, alongside civil rights advocates. A significant contingent of Oakwood Creek residents, including the Hendersons, Miss S. Gable, and even Bob Sterling, attended, their presence a silent testament to the community impact. James sat quietly in the front row with May and Gian, offering silent support. Carol Thompson stood before the judge, visibly diminished. She had lost weight. Her severe blonde bob was now limp and slightly disheveled, and her usually ramrod, straight posture of defiance was replaced by a noticeable tremble. Her public defender spoke briefly of mitigating factors, citing a difficult divorce years prior, financial stress, and feelings of social isolation that may have contributed to her distorted worldview and behavior. When invited to speak, Carol offered a mumbled, almost inaudible statement that sounded more like petulant self-pity than genuine remorse. I just wanted the neighborhood rules followed," she muttered, avoiding eye contact with the Chens or the judge. "I didn't mean for all of this to happen." Then, the assistant U.S. attorney methodically presented the case for sentencing. He read harrowing excerpts from May and Gian's victim impact statements. He played a carefully selected portion of the 911 call, Carol's voice sharp with fabricated panic and laced with venomous, racially charged accusations. He summarized the evidence of her prior prejudiced behavior and the documented pattern of targeting. He emphasized the deliberate manipulation of law enforcement and the profound trauma inflicted on the elderly victims. The judge, a highly respected jurist known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense demeanor, listened intently, her expression unreadable. When the prosecutor concluded, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. The judge took a moment, reviewing her notes, then looked directly at Carol Thompson. "Miss Thompson," she began, her voice clear and carrying easily through the room, commanding immediate attention. This court acknowledges that homeowners associations, when administered fairly and reasonably, can serve a legitimate purpose in maintaining community standards. However, the evidence presented here demonstrates unequivocally that you twisted that purpose into a vile weapon of prejudice and personal animosity. She paused, her gaze unwavering. "You did not see mere garden ornaments on your neighbor's property, Miss Thompson. You saw difference. You saw an opportunity to harass, intimidate, and exclude individuals based on their cultural heritage. You did not see neighbors sharing their traditions. You saw outsiders who, in your deeply distorted and prejudiced view, did not belong in your neighborhood." The judge's voice grew firmer. "You then escalated your campaign of petty tyranny in the most dangerous way possible by filing a false, inflammatory, and racially charged report with emergency services. You deliberately manipulated law enforcement, weaponizing the very systems meant to protect citizens, inciting a response that foreseeably led to the unjustified arrest, humiliation, and profound traumatization of two elderly, peaceful, and respected members of this community. Your actions were not merely misguided or overzealous, Miss Thompson. They were malicious, calculated, dangerous, and fundamentally rooted in bigotry. You exploited societal vulnerabilities and turned instruments of public safety into tools of hate." The judge spoke of the broader implications, the corrosive effect of such actions on community trust, the damage done to the principles of equality and mutual respect, the real harm inflicted not just on the Chens, but on the fabric of society when prejudice is allowed to fester and dictate action. The message from this court and from the laws you violated must be absolutely unequivocal. Using racial animus to manipulate law enforcement and terrorize your neighbors is intolerable in a civilized society and will be met with significant consequences. Carol Thompson finally broke, weeping silently, her shoulders shaking, though whether from remorse or self-pity remained ambiguous. Therefore, the judge continued, her voice resonant with authority, "Pursuant to the terms of the plea agreement, and considering the severity of the offense, the profound impact on the victims, and the need for both punishment and deterrence, this court sentences you, Carol Thompson, to 3 years incarceration in a federal correctional facility." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. 3 years. It was a substantial sentence for the specific charge pled, clearly reflecting the judge's assessment of the egregious nature of Carol's conduct and the hate crime motivation underpinning it. But the judge wasn't finished. "Following your period of incarceration, you will serve a term of 3 years of supervised release. Conditions of this release will include mandatory participation in intensive cultural sensitivity training and anger management counseling. Furthermore, this court orders full restitution to be paid to Mr. and Mrs. Chen for emotional distress, legal fees, and any other related expenses incurred as a result of your actions. The final amount to be determined." The judge paused again, looking at the file, then back at Carol. "Additionally, based on the clear evidence presented regarding the racially motivated nature of your actions, intended to deprive Mr. and Mrs. Chen of their constitutionally protected right to the peaceful enjoyment of their property, and considering the specific federal laws you violated in furtherance of this harassment, this court finds sufficient grounds exist to warrant civil forfeiture proceedings. The U.S. Attorney's Office is hereby directed to initiate such proceedings against assets traceable to the harm caused by your criminal conduct, potentially including your residence located at 9 Oakwood Lane, Oakwood Creek. Any proceeds realized from such forfeiture will be applied towards damages, restitution, and funding relevant community relations programs. Carol let out a choked sob, her face ashen. Prison time, mandatory counseling, significant financial restitution, and now, the very real prospect of losing her house, the epicenter of her perceived domain. The smug neighborhood enforcer who had tried to ruin the Chen's lives over garden lanterns was facing complete and utter ruin herself. James felt a complex wave of emotions wash over him, a grim satisfaction that justice, however imperfect, was being served, a lingering, visceral anger at the pain and fear his grandparents had been forced to endure, and a profound sadness that such corrosive hate could flourish in the seemingly tranquil soil of suburban America. He reached over, squeezing May's hand gently, and put a supportive arm around Gian's shoulders, as Carol Thompson, weeping and stumbling, was led away by U.S. Marshals. The Oakwood Creek neighbors, who had attended, exchanged looks of relief mixed with solemnity. The ordeal that had fractured their community was finally reaching its conclusion, but the lessons learned about vigilance, courage, and the insidious nature of unchecked prejudice remained starkly relevant. In the months and years that followed, life in Oakwood Creek slowly recalibrated, finding a new, more conscious equilibrium. The Chen silk lanterns remained fixtures along their walkway, their soft, warm glow now widely regarded as a symbol of resilience, cultural pride, and the community's eventual stand against intolerance. Rather than a point of conflict, neighbors made a more deliberate effort to connect, to look out for one another, to challenge casual prejudice when they encountered it. The HOA, under Bob Sterling's surprisingly steady new leadership, shifted its focus from punitive enforcement to actively fostering inclusivity and community engagement, organizing multicultural events, and revising ambiguous bylaws. The internal investigation at the police department resulted in significant disciplinary action against officers Miller and Davies, including suspensions and mandatory, ongoing remedial training in bias recognition and de-escalation. Chief Davis implemented department-wide reforms regarding the handling of potentially bias-motivated calls, emphasizing verification and objective assessment over automatic reliance on caller narratives, especially from those with a history of complaints. Carol Thompson's house at 9 Oakwood Lane eventually went into foreclosure and was sold as part of the civil forfeiture process. A significant portion of the proceeds went towards the Chen's restitution fund and helped establish a local community relations initiative aimed at promoting intercultural understanding. Carol served her sentence in a low-security federal facility, stripped of her perceived power, her misplaced entitlement, and her freedom. James continued his vital work in Washington, D.C., the ongoing fight against hate crimes imbued with an even deeper, more personal resonance. He visited his grandparents as often as his demanding schedule allowed. The shadows beneath their eyes had long since faded, replaced by the familiar warmth and quiet wisdom he cherished. They still spent hours together tending their vibrant garden, the air once again rich with the untroubled perfume of May's flowers. Sometimes, sitting together on their patio in the tranquil twilight, watching the gentle light from the silk lanterns dance in the evening breeze. Gian would reach over and pat James's hand. "We are safe now, James," he would say, his voice filled with quiet gratitude and a rediscovered sense of peace. "Because of you, and because, in the end, enough people chose kindness over fear." May would nod in agreement, adding softly, her eyes reflecting the soft lantern light, "Hate can be very loud, James. It makes a big noise, but kindness, understanding, these have much deeper roots. They last longer." James knew the fight was far from over. Prejudice and bigotry wouldn't vanish overnight with one court case or one community's reckoning. But seeing his grandparents find peace again in their own home, watching a neighborhood learn and actively strive to heal its divisions, witnessing tangible consequences for acts fueled by hate, it reaffirmed his commitment, fueled his resolve. Justice, like the meticulously cultivated plants in May and Gian's beloved garden sanctuary, required constant vigilance, patience, and care. But it could bloom, casting a resilient and enduring light, even after the harshest, most unexpected storms. The memory of Carol Thompson, the self-proclaimed guardian of Oakwood Creek, who became its cautionary tale, served as a stark reminder: hatred, left unchecked, ultimately consumes the vessel that harbors it, while dignity, resilience, and quiet expressions of identity endure, shining far brighter and lasting far longer.